Welcome to 1B. At the moment I'm recording this, I haven't chosen a title for it yet, but I just want to let you know, if you came upon this podcast 1B, you're going to have to listen to 1A first. And that's just the way it is. That's just the way it is when we try to understand someone of the magnitude of Immanuel Kant. In 1A, I introduce Kant, himself, his main ideas, his life, talk about what his philosophical project is. In chapter 2, I talked about the Kant's critiques of Leibniz and Hume. And that's really setting the stage for, Kant's own philosophy, his critiques, all of his thinking. And chapter 3, it covered the Copernican revolution, where we start to see reality with the mind at the center. We do not form to objects outside of us. Objects outside of us must form to us. Of course, I'm going to do a little bit of, reviewing and, covering things that we've talked about already. But if you can't spend the time to listen to 1A, then I would just actually, copy the link, the YouTube link, put it in Notebook LM or in Gemini, and ask it just to break down the timestamps. Like make a map of the concepts or the themes that are discussed in the podcast. It might not do that great of a job, but the stuff that I'm talking about is well documented. So I think it should, it should be able to help you if you cannot spare the time. But anyways, for those of you that already listened to 1A, nice to, I just hope you're well and hope you're happy, and you'll have a great vacation soon, and you win the lottery. How about that? All right. Chapter 4. A priori cognition. Knowledge before the world speaks. So let us begin with a question of origin. I don't want to be too corny here, but, this is just to we want to just pull it out right into the open, okay? And the question that strikes at the very root of human understanding. So just imagine a child, who has never felt the cold spray of the ocean, or never opened a geometry textbook, and never watched David Hume strike a cue ball across a green felt billiard table. Could this child still know certain things, fundamental, unshakable truths, without anyone whispering them in their ear or revealing them to their eyes? For centuries before Immanuel Kant, the prevailing wind of philosophy, particularly from the British empiricists like John Locke and David Hume, they would suggest that the answer was a resounding no. They argued that the mind was a tabula rasa, a completely passive, blank slate upon which the physical world scribbles its sensory data. Every idea, they insisted, was merely a faded copy of a prior physical sensation. But Kant, roused from his dogmatic slumber by Hume, and I'll really try to stay away from that. I don't like that. I know it's necessary, but I've just heard it so many times. So Kant being, roused here by Hume's devastating skepticism regarding causality, Kant proposed something revolutionary. He realized that to save the certainty of human knowledge from dissolving into mere psychological habit, we must recognize a specific, profound kind of intelligence that we bring with us, built into the very architecture of our own minds. He called this a priori cognition, knowledge that is absolutely independent of all experience. Now, to unpack exactly what the mind brings to this cognitive endeavor, we must look at how Kant divides all human knowledge into two distinct buckets. The first is a posteriori. A posteriori. Okay, either way, it's posteriori. A posteriori. So not a priori, not before, but after. This is the first a posteriori of knowledge. Okay, this is the first bucket, which is derived entirely from sensory experience. This is the empirical bucket. It contains everything we pick up by simply interacting with the physical environment. Really simple examples like we know the sky is blue, that ice cream is cold, or that water boils at a certain temperature, only because we have eyes and skin to verify these, very empirical facts. These truths are completely contingent. They could logically be otherwise in a different universe. Observation tells us what is, but it never tells us what must be. And then there is the a priori bucket. This is bucket number 2, the transcendental bucket. This bucket containing the truths that are necessarily true and universally valid, requiring no sensory confirmation. But because they are wired into the cognitive presets, so Kant, with the precision of a master clockmaker, reveals that this bucket contains two completely different kinds of tools. The first tool is analytic a priori knowledge. These are truths that are true by strict logical definition. They merely unpack what is already contained within a concept. As Professor Michael Seguru noted, these are clarifying but ultimately empty because they do not add new light to our understanding of the world. And here's an example that is always used in Kantian scholarship. All bachelors are unmarried. This is an analytic judgment. We do not need to conduct we don't need to conduct a demographic survey of every bachelor in the city to verify this. The very concept of a bachelor already contains the predicate unmarried. It is safe, it is a certain truth, but it is merely an echo of a definition. The second tool, the true crown jewel of Kant's system, is synthetic a priori knowledge. These propositions expand our horizons by adding brand new information, yet we know them with a must be so. Like, oh, that must be so. It adds that necessity that empirical observation could never provide. Here's another super famous example in Kantian scholarship. I mean, Kant even used this example in the Critique of Pure Reason. So consider the simple arithmetic of 7 plus 5 equals 12. As Paul Guyer illuminates in his commentary, the concept of 12, it is not secretly hidden inside the number 7 or the number 5. We must perform an active mental synthesis, putting these units together in time to reach the sum. What does this mean in time? Well, everything is happening in time. Every time you look at something, every time you think A, B, C, it's time is being produced by your mind, by you, observing anything. The best way to think about it is like, as I'm talking, each of my words consists of time. When you're hearing these words, you're hearing them one at a time. Try to keep it simple like that. Yet, so putting these units together in time to reach the sum 7 plus 5 equals 12. Yet, once we have synthesized that 12, we know it is true for every person. This is a universal. Nobody can do 7 plus 5 and not get 12. It is universal. It is true for every person in every place for all time, without ever having to count 12 physical apples to verify it. The power extends directly into the physical world we inhabit, like take geometry. A straight line is the shortest path between 2 points. This is an informative truth that adds to our knowledge of space. Yet we know it a priori. We do not need to physically measure every dirt path on Earth to be certain of it. But the most vital synthetic a priori truth of all is the principle of causality. Every event has a cause. Hume famously argued that we only see one thing following another, a constant conjunction, and that our belief in a necessary cause is just a psychological habit formed by repetition. Kant counters that causality is not a habit we casually learn from the world. It is an unbreakable law that our mind prescribes to nature so that experience can be coherent in the first place. So how does the mind execute this act of construction? As established in Chapter 3, this knowledge arises through the seamless union of sensibility and understanding. By binding the raw spatiotemporal intuitions with the structural categories, the mind successfully performs this active synthesis. All right, so traveling now to the engine room, transcendental unity of apperception. If we possess these incredible structuring tools, these a priori categories, how do they actually function together? Let us descend into the deepest engine room of the Kantian system. Suppose we possessed all these rules, but no central anchor to tie them to. Imagine a consciousness like a shattered mirror, reflecting random flashes of light without any coherent center. How do these scattered shards become a single, unbroken reflection? Let us imagine, as Professor Robert Paul Wolff often invited his students to do, a consciousness that lacked a central organizing unit or a central organizing unity. You would experience a flash of red at one moment, a sharp sound the next, a feeling of warmth the third, but there would be absolutely no continuous you to connect them. Experience would be exactly what William James later called a blooming, buzzing confusion. For these disconnected sensations to belong to one unified subject, the mind must actively perform a synthesis. This is the core of the transcendental deduction, the rigorous proof that for us to even say, I am having this experience, we must have already applied the categories of the understanding to that sensory data. As Professor Dan Robinson, and I like to call him Daniel N. Robinson, how he emphasized the I think is not just a psychological fact about your personality or your mood or your memories. It is a logical transcendental necessity. It is exactly what your mind is doing. Think of this as like a master editor of a film. The editor is not one of the characters acting on the screen. Rather, the editor is the very perspective that allows the scattered clips and the desperate shots to be bound into a single coherent narrative timeline. Without that unifying eye, the movie of our lives would just be a pile of meaningless, unedited footage abandoned on the cutting room floor. Kant's ultimate masterstroke is showing that this internal unity of the I and the external unity of the objective world are two sides of the exact same coin, the coin of you. When we see a lightning flash followed by a thunderclap, our eye doesn't just passively happen to see them. It binds them together using a category of causality. If we lacked that rule, we wouldn't just lose the physical connection between the flash and the boom. We would lose the continuity of the we, the you who is experiencing it. We do not discover the laws of nature by looking at the world. We prescribe those laws to the world through the spontaneous, unifying activity of our own cognition. So this is where we're going to come up to the boundary now. This is the phenomenon and the noumenon. And I did touch it on this in chapter 3, chapter 2, and we're going to ramble through this because it's going to bring us new insights. If we accept that the mind is the active editor of this cohesive cinematic experience, a disturbing, almost haunting question immediately arises. What lies beyond the construction? If our perception is a flawlessly edited film, what is the source of the projection? As in, what is really out there and where is all this coming from? Recognizing this active construction forces us to acknowledge a profound, inescapable division in reality itself. Kant does not deny the existence of an independent external world. To do so, he famously remarked, would be the absolute scandal of philosophy. Instead, he insists that the world we actually experience is inescapably shaped by the necessary biological structures of our own cognition. This realization gives rise to the absolute boundary between phenomenon and noumenon. Imagine the human mind as a high-fidelity cinema, the projected film, the colors, the motion, the causal plot unfolding predictably on the screen. This is the phenomenal world. It is vivid, structured, and undeniably real to every viewer sitting in the theater. It is the world of everyday life, of rigorous physical science, of wooden tables, heavy chairs, and violent thunderstorms. It is an objectivity founded exclusively upon the formal conditions of the human mind. But the raw, unfiltered light burning furiously inside the projector booth, this represents the nominal world, the thing in itself, the ding and sitch. We know the light is there. Without it, the screen of our consciousness would be entirely black. But we can only see that light after it has passed through the film strip of space and time and the focusing lens of the categories. We cannot turn around and look directly into the raw light itself without being instantly blinded. We can only know its effects as they appear as phenomenon. So when the projector is showing the show right on the wall or on the screen, that's the phenomenal world that we see, the show that we're watching. It's the things we experience in life, right? Just like watching the movie. And when we try to understand where that movie comes from, where our sense of reality comes from, and in this metaphor, we look at the projector, we look into the light to see where the light is emitting from. That light blinds us. It's inaccessible to us. We cannot see the movie staring at the light. As Sebastian Gardner argues in his Guide to the Critique, this distinction is primarily meant to limit the pretension of sensibility. It prevents empirical silence from claiming it has achieved a God's eye view of the universe. So consider again a lightning strike. The raw data, the impinging of photons and acoustic waves, so again, the raw data, the impinging of photons and acoustic waves, this is the nominal affection. As we have seen, the mind's internal forms and categories immediately process this data. Locating the flash and boom spatiotemporally is linking them causally. The storm we experience is the phenomenal. It is a shared scientific reality, but the storm in itself, stripped of its spatial, temporal, and causal translation by the mind, it remains a nominal silence, logically thinkable, but forever unknowable. The climax here, the refutation of idealism. Yet as we sit comfortably in this theater of the mind, a skeptical shadow lingers over the entire cinematic architecture. If all experience is merely a mind-structured film of phenomenon, how do we know external objects truly exist at all? Are we just solitary prisoners dreaming a perfectly consistent illusion? This is exactly what Rene Descartes worried we might, that this is what might be happening. We might be brains deceived by a malicious demon. Berkeley reduced all of physical reality to mere ideas suspended in the mind of God. In the 1787 B edition of the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant realized he needed to violently sever his transcendental idealism from this subjective skeptical tradition. He achieved this through the refutation of idealism, a brilliant, elegant proof demonstrating that our internal psychological life, that very I think we established earlier, it absolutely requires a permanent external spatial world to exist. Yes. So the fact that we can say I think, it means there is a world outside of us. The argument unfolds with relentless logic. I am undeniably conscious of my own existence in time, experiencing a continuous flux of fleeting thoughts, sudden feelings, and passing memories. Yet to perceive any sequence of changes, there must be something permanent against which that sequence is measured. Just as the motion of a ship can only be gauged against the fixed shores of a river, because my inner sense is a realm of constant chaotic flux. This permanent backdrop cannot possibly be my inner self. There is no unchanging substance to be found by looking purely inward. Therefore, my internal self-awareness is only possible if there are permanent objects existing in space outside of me. We are sitting in a study, reflecting on a memory from childhood. We know our thoughts are changing from moment to moment. To measure this sequence of thoughts, to ground the I that is doing the thinking, we need something unchanging. The physical desk we are leaning on, the book resting in our hands, the walls of the room. External objects in space are not an illusion or a secondary doubtful inference. They are the absolute prerequisite for having any internal self-awareness at all. Without persistent external things, our inner time order entirely collapses. This decisively refutes both problematic idealism, the belief that the external world is doubtful, and dogmatic idealism, the belief that the external world is false. By proving that the internal unity of the I think actively demands the external permanence of spatial objects, Kant creates a flawless philosophical arc. Our structured experience guarantees real outer objects. The profound division between the phenomenal screen and the noumenal light is the absolute cornerstone of the critical project. It rescues Newtonian physics by grounding its laws in the universal structure of the human mind, ensuring that the laws of nature will never fail us because they are, in fact, the laws of our own understanding. Yet it simultaneously dismantles metaphysical dogmatism. It tells the philosopher that they can never prove the existence of God or the immortality of the soul using theoretical reason, because those ideas are nominal and lie permanently beyond the grid. The limitation, however, is not a defeat. By defining theoretical knowledge of the thing in itself, Kant successfully shifts the weight of our highest ultimate concerns from the cold laboratory of the scientist to the beating heart of the moral agent, fortified against skepticism with the internal engine of the mind mapped and the reality of the external world secured. We are ready to understand how this active constructing mind navigates the stormy waters of human freedom. Chapter 5, The Mind's Categories, Transforming Chaos into Coherence. Imagine for a moment opening your eyes for the very first time, stripped entirely of all innate conceptual frameworks. What would you actually experience? It would not be a room composed of distinct objects, measurable distances, and sequential events. It would be a blinding storm of colors, a deafening roar of unstructured noise, and a tactile bombardment without edge or limit. Without the mind's active intervention, human experience would be less than a dream. It would be a mere onrushing stream of impressions with no connections, no persistence, and no ultimate meaning. Having drawn the fateful line between the phenomenon and noumenon in our last exploration, we must now descend even deeper into the machine that actually constructs the phenomenal world that we inhabit. The pure forms of intuition, space and time. They provide the bare stage, but a stage is not a play. We already know that the mind actively deploys its own architectural rules, and that's the 12 a priori categories, functioning as the grammar of human thought to structure the manifold of intuition into objects, events, and universal laws. As Kant insists, the understanding does not derive its laws from nature, but rather prescribe them to it. A newborn does not learn causality by trial and error. The expectation that a cause will produce an effect is already present, a functional prerequisite ready to organize incoming noise into a meaningful pattern. The schematism, bridging the heterogeneous gulf. We have now proven that the mind has the authority to legislate nature, but a severe mechanical problem remains. The categories are pure abstract intellect. For example, the pure logical concept of cause. Sensations, however, are concrete and empirical, a visual flash of light. They're entirely heterogeneous, like trying to fit square logical pegs into round temporal holes. How can an abstract concept physically grip a sensory intuition? Kant's ingenious solution is the schematism of the pure concepts of the understanding, which he described as a hidden art in the depths of the human soul. To bridge this unbridgeable gulf, Kant requires a third thing that shares the nature of both the intellectual and the sensible. This mediating bridge is time. Time is pure and a priori, like a category, but it is also the universal form of all sensible intuition, like a sensation. Through the imagination, the mind creates a schema, a specific time determination for each category. By translating abstract logic into temporal grammar, the mind successfully maps its laws onto nature. Let's go over these. Quantity. Quantity is schematized as number, the successive addition of units in time, such as counting beats or steps. 1, 2, 3, yes, counting time. Quality is schematized as the filling of time, an intensity of waxing or waning, like a sound growing louder. So, like, that rise that you hear is happening in time. You can hear a change. Something fluctuates about the quality of the sound. Substance. Substance is schematized as permanence through time. So yes, nothing is permanent, right? Everything is changing or changes at some point. Causality. Causality is schematized as regular rule-governed succession in time. So when something happens, there had to have been a cause. That cause is in time 100% because there was some sort of motion there. There was something that had transpired. Consider Kant's famous example of perceiving a ship moving downstream. The pure category of causality is entirely abstract, but the schema makes it concrete. It dictates a lawful succession in time, where one position of the ship strictly follows another under an irreversible rule. Without the schematism, categories would remain empty, logical placeholders. With it, they firmly grip sensible data, enabling objective judgment. The principles of pure understanding. Now, fully armed with schematized categories, the understanding does not simply catalog reality. It actively generates the universal laws of nature. In the analytic of principles, Kant derives 4 great sets of synthetic a priori truths that hold with apodictic certainty. Corresponding to quantity are the axioms of intuition. All appearances possess extensive magnitude because the mind imposes a part-whole structure. We can confidently measure the length of a road or calculate the volume of a sphere. For quality, we have the anticipations of perception. Every sensation has an intensive degree from 0 upward. We anticipate that a fire can grow from a faint, warm glow to a binding, scorching glare. The analogies of experience. The principles for relation are perhaps the most profound. They provide the absolute legal charter for the physical sciences. The first analogy, persistence of substance. This establishes the conservation of matter. Substance can never be created or annihilated by natural means. It merely alters its form. The second analogy, causality. This grounds all scientific inquiry. Events do not merely follow one another accidentally. They are bound by necessary connections according to rules. The third analogy, community. This binds the world into a reciprocal, interacting whole. No physical object acts in total isolation. And I should say interacting in a totality because, yeah, anyways, you can't read what I'm saying. And if it's transcribed, it's probably going to say HOLE. All right. Finally, the postulates of empirical thought govern modality, defining exactly what is possible, actual, or necessary based on its connection to the material conditions of our experience. The limits of the island. Why does this magnificent architecture matter so profoundly? Because without these categories, schemata, and principles, the sensory manifold would remain forever disconnected. There would be no enduring objects, no causal chains, no necessary laws, only fleeting phantom impressions dissolving into nothingness. Kant's framework beautifully explains how we inhabit a shared, objective world of science, while soberly reminding us that this world is entirely phenomenal. The software of the mind perfectly legislates over the hardware of nature, but it leaves the nominal realm, things as they are in themselves, forever beyond our grasp. We have now successfully mapped the safe, sunlit island of the understanding. But human reason is unrelenting. It is never satisfied with mere appearances. It yearns to gaze past the horizon, seeking the ultimate, unconditioned truths of the universe. We are now prepared to follow Kant as he turns his critical eye toward this treacherous ocean. We must leave the safety of the analytic and confront what happens when the mind attempts to think beyond the limits of space and time. Yes, the seductive, inevitable illusions of the transcendental dialectic. Chapter 6, The Transcendental Dialectic, Reason's Seductive Shipwreck. Before we can step firmly into the sunlight of Kant's moral world, we must first take that deep descension into the fog of the transcendental dialectic. Now, you might have heard me say this before, and I'll probably say it again if I forget. This is the most dramatic movement of the critique of pure reason. The negative phase, where reason turns its critical gaze inward to diagnose its own inherent seductive and ultimately fallacious temptations. The human mind possesses an unrelenting drive for the unconditioned. It is never content with the conditioned, rule-governed truths secured by the understanding. Traditional metaphysics dreamed of piercing the veil to know reality as it is in itself, a transcendent enterprise doomed to illusion. Kant transforms this into a critical immanent science, no longer speculation about objects beyond experience, but a disciplined inventory of the a priori principles that govern appearances and, above all, a rigorous determination of the limits of human reason. Reason's fatal ambition and the ghost in the machine. All right, so in the analytic, the understanding acted as the legislator, binding sensory data into objects. But in the dialectic, reason, the Vernunft, it seeks something higher, total unity. Reason is driven by a profound logical requirement to find the unconditioned ground for every conditioned appearance. As we established in Chapter 3, reason naturally targets three transcendental ideas: the absolute unity of the thinking subject, the soul, the absolute unity of this series of appearances, the world, and the absolute unity of the condition of all objects of thought, God. These ideas are not bad in themselves. They are regulative. They act as a focus imaginarius and an imaginary focal point that encourages the scientist to keep looking for deeper causes and wider systems. The error or transcendental illusion occurs when we treat these ideas as constitutive, when we mistake a necessary goal of the mind for a literal thing that exists out there in the nominal void. When rational psychology tries to prove that the soul is a simple, immortal, and persisting substance, it commits a strictly formal fallacy. Crucially, the I is the subject of thought, not an object of intuition. We have the grammar of a soul, indeed, but absolutely no empirical data for it. By exposing this paralogism, Kant denies theoretical knowledge of the soul's immortality, not to dismiss it, but to prevent it from being treated like a mere biological or physical fact. The antinomies and the master key. While reason turns its gaze to the cosmos, it finds itself entangled in the antinomies, pressing its principles beyond possible experience into a regressive series that sensibility can never supply. This generates absolute contradictions where two opposing arguments, the thesis and the antithesis, seem equally provable by logic. While the mathematical antinomies expose the futility of measuring a world whole, like a world totality, that is not a possible object of experience. The dynamical antinomies provide the absolute master key to the Kantian architecture. The third antinomy debates whether there must be a spontaneous first cause, which is freedom, thesis, or whether everything occurs according to universal natural causation, antithesis. Kant reveals that both can be true in different respects. The antithesis reigns over appearances, universal causation, while the thesis remains logically possible for things in themselves. Let's bring this abstract war of reason down to earth with a thought experiment. So imagine we're sitting in a crowded town hall and we witness a woman abruptly stand up from her chair to speak out against a corrupt law. How do we explain her action? If we put on the lenses of the scientist, we must view her standing up exclusively as an event in the phenomenal realm. Through this lens, we trace a perfectly unbroken deterministic chain of physical causes. The neurochemical signals firing in her brain, the adrenaline surging in her bloodstream, the exact contraction of her muscle fibers, and the sociological conditioning of her childhood. In the realm of appearances, the antithesis is absolute. There is no freedom here. Every single movement is dictated by the rigid laws of nature. But Kant warns us that this is only half the picture. The woman is not merely a biological machine. She is a rational agent. If we shift our perspective to the nominal realm, the world of things in themselves, we recognize her capacity for moral autonomy. When she stands up to speak, she is not just reacting to physical stimuli. She is acting on a moral principle. From this intelligible standpoint, her choice to stand is a true first cause. It is spontaneous and uncaused initiation of a brand new sequence of events that ripples out into the physical world. Here, the thesis survives. She is entirely free. By proving that transcendental freedom is at least logically possible, Kant provides the exact foothold necessary for the categorical imperative. The regulative veil and the primacy of the practical. Even after reason's relentless critique of the uns realisitium, dismantling the ontological proof by demonstrating that existence is not a real predicate, these illusions persist. This transcendental illusion, transcendental sheen, or sheen. Anyways, it's natural and unavoidable. This is not a mistake we simply fix like a mathematical error. It is an inescapable feature of our cognitive architecture. We cannot help but look for the absolute first principle, even when we know it lies beyond the veil of possible experience. The dialectic, therefore, is not a work of schematism, but of strict limitation. By showing that reason cannot know the soul, the world totality, or God, through the laboratory or through pure logic, Kant achieves his most famous goal. I had to deny knowledge in order to make room for faith. Physics. So we can clearly see here that he humbles speculative reason to prepare the way for practical reason. The shipwreck of the dialect is the only thing that allows the compass of duty to function. By demonstrating that theoretical reason is biologically and logically confined to the phenomenal realm, he has protected the noumenal realm from being reduced to mere clockwork physics. This is exactly where the dignity of the moral law finds its footing. If we could prove through science that we are free, freedom would be just another empirical fact. If we could formally prove God's existence, our morality would be driven by the cowardly calculation of reward and punishment rather than the autonomy of pure duty. By denying theoretical knowledge, Kant is ensured that the moral life remains a matter of rational choice rather than physical compulsion. Critical metaphysics thus achieves a serene balance. Synthetic a priori judgments reign securely over phenomenon, grounding science in objectivity. Beyond those bounds, they generate inevitable yet fortunate illusion. And what Kant does is that he exposes the pretensions of transcendent metaphysics while rigorously protecting the practical postulates of freedom, immortality, and God. As Kant would later reflect in the conclusion of his second critique, bringing his entire philosophical epic into focus. Two things fill the mind with ever new and increasing admiration and awe, and more often and steadily we reflect upon them: the starry heavens above me and the moral law within me. In our next lecture, we will finally step off the phenomenal island of the understanding and see how these critical boundaries become the very foundation for Kant's ethics, a moral certainty more luminous than any theoretical proof.